Welcome back, everybody. So today's video is going to be a step-by-step instructional on how to make your own DIY stuff sack. And not just any cheap stuff sack, but one that has a cinchable cord lock top that's reinforced, and the entire sack is double stitched, so it's going to be a long-lasting, durable stuff sack with many uses. And just keep in mind, this is more of a concept video, so although I do show how to make a very specific stuff sack, really you can change things up once you learn how to do it, and you can switch the material. So if you want to make a mesh mosquito netting stuff sack like I've done with my tarp, you can make one of those and it'll be breathable, allow your tarp to dry. Or if you want to make a larger one that you can compress a sleeping bag into, you just up the size of the pattern you make. So really you're learning a skill set here that you can apply to many different types of stuff sacks. It's not just for this one that I show here. Okay, so let's get into the materials you're going to need, and as you can see, it's not very many. So to start off, you're going to need some sort of base material, and I'm using a scrap of sil nylon here just for a little extra water repellency, but you can also use ripstop nylon, you can use mesh for breathability, or any other sort of scrap material you have laying around. It really doesn't take too much material to make a stuff sack depending on what size it is. Additionally, you're going to need some sort of cord so you can actually have something to cinch the top of the bag shut. Now, there are static cords like the left one, and there are dynamic shock cords like the right one, and they both work well. I tend to favor static just because they work a little better and they last a lot longer. For the cord, you're going to need one cord lock, which you can get on Amazon. I'll put some links on my website and in the description. And you can really find them anywhere. You probably have a few spare ones laying around from an old pack. And that's just going to keep the cord tight when you do cinch it. And one thing that's really going to make this a quality stuff sack and allow it to last a lot longer is reinforcing the little channels where the cord actually comes out and where you cinch the stuff sack. And the best way I've found to do that is using grosgrain ribbon. And I like to use either a 7/8 or a 1-inch ribbon. And that's just going to reinforce the area where there's a lot of friction where that cord moves in and out frequently. And if you don't have the grosgrain, you can also use just a heavy-duty pack material and just cut a little strip out of it. And finally, you'll need some thread. And as always with outdoor gear, I recommend 100% polyester thread as opposed to some of the other blends, and especially opposed to cotton thread, which just does not hold up well in the moisture and the outdoor conditions. And if you haven't figured it out yet, you're going to need a sewing machine too. So let's get started. So the first step in making a stuff sack is to actually figure out what you want your final dimensions on the sack to be. And as you can see here, I'm shooting for a cube that's 8 inches tall by 4 inches wide by 4 inches wide. And so in order to make a pattern for this, what we actually do is unravel that square and then add an inch of seam allowance along each of the edges of that square, so that when we do sew it, we're not actually eating into the dimensions that we want it to be. We have a little extra fabric there that allows us to sew to the correct dimensions. And so if you unravel this, you can see with my calculations there, we have one 8-inch side and then plus an inch of seam allowance on each side of that, so that comes out to 10 inches, and then 4 4-inch sides, so that's 16 inches plus 1 inch for each side of that, 2 more inches, so it comes out to 18 inches. And so I'm making a pattern here of 10 inches by 18 for a final stuff sack size of around 8 inches tall by 4 inches by 4 inches wide. And I really like to make patterns like this. It's super helpful, A, just to get a good idea of what you're doing, B, to actually, if you ever want to reproduce this stuff sack, say you really like the size that it came out to, it's nice to have a pattern because you can just go right back, cut it out again, and recreate the exact same thing. And also C, it makes it really easy to actually cut out your fabric. So you just have this little piece of cardboard here, you throw it on top of whatever your material is. In this case it's going to be sil nylon, trace around it and cut it out and you're good to go. So you don't actually have to re-lay out this square on your material, you can just use the cardboard. And as you can see here, I'm just using an old cereal box, which works great, and at least for this size of stuff sack. Any bigger you'd probably need something else, but you can also use just any sort of thick paper. You can see in the background there some patterns I've made out of packaging paper. It's also kind of cool to build up a stockpile of patterns that you can go back through and recreate anytime you want. So I'm going to fast forward through the rest of this. I think you get the idea. You draw the square there, make sure you have your seam allowance in, and then you cut it out. And the next step is fairly simple as well. You just take the cardboard pattern you made, stick it on your material. In this case I'm using a steel nylon scrap I have, and then I like to put some weights on it just to make sure you flatten out the material underneath and get a nice even cut. And then you mark out the pattern onto the material and cut it out again. That's all it takes. Alright, and the next step in the process is cutting out the reinforcements for the pullouts on the stuff sack. And I'm using this 7/8 inch grosgrain, and I'm going to cut it to 1.5 inches long, and I'm going to do that with 2 strips of it. And one thing you should always do with grosgrain and most webbings and most ropes is seal them off with a lighter. So you just heat up the edge just to make sure it doesn't unravel on you, and it just keeps the loose ends nice and tidy. Now we're getting to the fun part. So you're going to want to lay out your 2 reinforcement strips on the short edges of the square you've made, and you can see similar to this. And then what you're going to do is tack them down onto the fabric, just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance there on the side. You can see this one's been done, and I'm about to do the same thing on the other side here. So I'm just lining it up with the 1/4 inch mark on the machine, and I'm just stitching just over the black part just to attach it to the corner of the steel nylon here. As you can see, I go backwards and then forwards to do a lock stitch so it doesn't unravel on me. And I'll go backwards again once I reach the other side. And that's standard sewing procedure. Once you have your reinforcements tacked on like this, you're actually going to take the fabric and fold it in half so that the 2 reinforcement patches line up, but they're facing outward from each other, so they're on the outside of the fold. You can see here there is 1 reinforcement on the bottom of this side and 1 on the top, and they line up perfectly. And now you're going to do another 1/4 inch seam, but you're actually going to start just below where the 2 reinforcements are. So you don't actually want to sew the 2 reinforcements together, but you do want to sew right beneath them where the steel nylon is, and you want to join that and make sure you reinforce it well, because this is going to be a stress point on the bag and you want to make sure it's not going to pull apart or just wear with lots of use. So you can see here I'm doing another lock stitch just to double reinforce it, and then traveling down doing a 1/4 inch seam on this edge here. Once you get to the bottom edge of your fabric here, you're actually going to do another 1/4 inch seam along that bottom edge there. And you can see I'm rotating the fabric here and getting ready to do that seam. If you're prepared, I accidentally messed this up, but you can actually just stop your needle a 1/4 inch short of the bottom edge and lift up your presser foot, rotate the fabric, and just keep that seam going without having to start a whole new line. But I forgot to do that here, so I'm just starting a new line, and I'm going to follow it through down to the other side. And once I get to that side, I'm actually going to repeat the whole process over just to double stitch this entire seam, reinforce it, And so if it's put under a lot of pressure, say you're stuffing a sleeping bag in it, it's going to hold up a lot better than if it just had one row of stitching. Just remember, as you're coming back around up towards the reinforcements, you still want to stop right beneath the black reinforcements just so you don't stitch them together. And once you're done, you'll end up with something that looks like this. And just remember, those reinforcement pieces up top are still not joined together, nor will they ever be. And this step is a little confusing, but you should be able to make sense of it once you see it being done. But essentially what you're doing here is creating the edges of the little holes where the rope is going to come out, where you actually cinch down the bag. You're reinforcing it. And so what you want to do is fold the reinforcement over back onto itself along the 1/4 inch seam that you had sewn on it before. And you can see that being done here. You want to do it independently on each reinforcement patch. So you want to make sure as you're doing this you're not accidentally sewing the other patch underneath this one. You kind of have to hold it off to the side, as you can see there. But that's basically it. You're just making a little channel there where the cordage can pass through without getting caught on anything. Once you're done with both sides, it should look something like this. And like I said, these two little reinforcement patches are going to be right where the rope comes out, or where the shock cord comes out, and where your cord lock actually cinches down. Next, you're just going to take the top edge of the stuff sack where the reinforcements are and just roll it over and do a quick little hem there that is going to actually hide the exposed edge of the material later on. And this is what it's going to look like when it's done. Once you're done there, you're going to take that very same rolled edge that you just made and roll it down one more time, and you're going to actually match up the two sides of the reinforcements together and form a little channel there that your rope can pass through. And so what I do is just stitch right along the exact same stitch I used to do that first roll, and you'll see that here. But basically you're rolling the edge of the fabric down one more time and making a channel through which your rope or shock cord can pass. And don't forget to actually double stitch the edges and lock stitch where the reinforcements are, because there's going to be a lot of stress on that area from the shock cord or the rope pulling against these channels you're making. Once you're done there, you should get a channel that looks something like this, and on the corner where the two reinforcement patches meet up, it actually looks like this. And this is where you're going to be threading through the rope or shock cord to create your drawstring. And creating a drawstring is really easy. I just take one end of the cord and, as always, take a flame to it just to make sure it doesn't unravel on you, and start to feed it through the channel we just made. And it's really not too hard to feed. If it's really hard, you can use something like a paper clip or a safety clip, a safety pin to attach to the rope and then make it easier to feed through. But I've never really had an issue just pushing it through. And you can always do a sort of inchworm type of movement with your hands to pull it through. And what I do is feed it through and then leave about an inch or 2 inches outside of each reinforcement corner there, which will give me enough room to tie a knot, put on the, or I'll first off put on the cord lock, then tie a knot, and still have the bag be able to open completely without being restricted by the cordage. So at this point you've basically created a stuff sack. And a lot of people are happy leaving the stuff sack at this point and just using it as is, but I like to actually create a boxed bottom for mine, and that just gives it a little more dimension and it lets it pack. If you're stuffing something into it, it'll pack more as a cube shape than it will as sort of a flat envelope shape like you're seeing here. So creating a box bottom is fairly easy. All you have to do is measure along your bottom edge there, opposite end of the channel, and find your halfway point on the fabric. And then what you're going to do is just take the two corners of the fabric and fold them inward into the halfway point on top of themselves, pin them down, and then just sew right along that seam. And you can see that here. And what this does is creates it's kind of a quick and dirty boxed bottom for your stuff sack, and there are better ways of doing it, but they take a little more planning and a lot more effort. And for me, I think this method just works a lot more easily and just as effectively. And there you have it. Once you flip it inside out, you've got your box bottom and you are done with your stuff sack. And you've made a high quality, durable, cinchable stuff sack, so that's pretty cool. And like I said earlier, this is a concept, so once you get the hang of it, you can adjust the size, adjust the material, maybe even take it further, make it a compression sack, anything like that. This is just kind of a building block for better future projects. Well guys, as always, thanks for watching, and hopefully you learned how to make a stuff sack today. If you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you like what you've seen here, I've got a few more DIY videos on my channel and many more coming up soon. So I'll be working on rain skirts soon, backpacks, quilts, stuff like that, and hopefully I'll be releasing videos on all of those things. And if you enjoy these types of videos, maybe consider heading over to my Patreon and supporting them. It really helps me out, and there are some pretty sweet goals coming up soon that we will hopefully reach. Thanks guys.